A little small. They kind of like, well, it's special, you know?
Go ahead and begin.
Okay.
It's August 30th, 2022. This is the GBOS LUC joint meeting. The Girdwood Board of Supervisors, its committees and subcommittees are subject to the Alaska Open Meetings Act as found in Alaska Statute 44.62.310 and Anchorage Municipal Code 1.25 public meetings. The Girdwood Board of Supervisors operates under the Girdwood Public Meetings Standards of Conduct. We'll call the meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. I am Brianna Sullivan, co-chair of GBOS, Parks and Recreation Cemetery Supervisor. We'll do a roll call in the room. We also have next to me
Mike Edgington, co-chair and land use supervisor.
Kevin McDermott, Chair, Land Use Committee.
Guy Wade, Fire Department.
Jennifer Wingard, roads and utilities.
and online.
Amanda Sassy, Public Safety Supervisor.
Thank you. And Diane, are you there? We see you. Can't hear you yet. Are there any disclosures tonight? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to agenda revisions and approval. August 30th, 2022, GBOS LUC joint meeting process for resolving update dispute regarding Colton Hills resolution. We have a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda and I'll make an amendment. So,
Okay.
do you want to do them separately or together?
Let's do them together.
Okay. So the amendment is we can add an item to, it will probably be counted as new business, but about the change in branch manager status for the Girdwood Library. If we have it as a new business, then we can probably discuss it next month.
Thank you. Do we have a second for the update to the agenda?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. We'll do a roll call to approve the agenda real quick, please.
Yes, Brianna Sullivan,
Yes.
Mike Edgington,
Yes.
Guy Wade,
Yes.
Jennifer Wingard, Kevin McDermott,
Yes.
and Amanda Sassy.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-6-0.
Thank you. Announcements. The public is encouraged to ask questions and provide comment. Please raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged. To help discussion stay productive, please direct your comments to the board rather than other members of the public and keep your comments focused on the business under discussion. Please be respectful of everyone's opinions. The GBOS 2023 budget meetings are scheduled as follows. The first one was July 26th, second tomorrow, Wednesday, August 31st at 12 p.m. and a potential budget meeting 3, Monday, September 19th at 6 p.m. The GBOS special meeting with Department of Transportation regarding the Alaska interchange is being scheduled. I believe it's September 14th at 7 p.m. And the Girdwood Valley Service Area Nonprofit Recreation Grant Presentations meeting will be held Wednesday, October 5th at 7 p.m. On the agenda, number 1 is discussing GBOS letter to the Department of Transportation regarding Girdwood Highway intersection, Alaska Highway and Seward Highway intersection improvements. Amanda Sassy and Jennifer Wingard have been working on this. So one of you may have the floor.
Amanda, do you want to take it?
I believe this is your email, if you wanted to start and go through it.
Okay. So the idea is just to get a list of what the objections actually are so that we know what we're talking to DOT about. And you can all see it. I don't know if we need to, I don't want to waste the time reading it, but I would say that I learned in the last few days that I definitely need to add a third point. So in addition to the overall size and scope of the loop on the Trinity Arm side being a concern, the loss of the secondary access is a big concern, particularly for our emergency personnel. And then the third thing is that the business owners at what I still have to call the Tesoro Mall are not happy. Pretty universally, I talked to everyone except the owner of the mall itself, and they're on the very slight end of furious. So I would add that as a list of our concern is they're really concerned about the lack of access to their business. And one thing that they all pointed out is that they've signed long-term leases. So one of them had just signed a lease in February for 8 years. They signed those leases with an understanding of a certain amount of traffic coming through the doors. And so I think we can all look at that traffic pattern that is being posed and understand that it will be less. It's something like definitely needs to happen there, but it would be great if we could design something that doesn't punish the people who sign leases. So that's what I can say.
Guy?
I have a question. I know Chief Weston mentioned that the way it's currently designed would cut off some of the access to Girdwood and allowing a second exit or entrance. And can we speak to that?
Yes, Amanda, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the secondary access to Toadstool, the idea being that if anywhere past
Sorry, Amanda, you're having mic issues. We can't hear you.
All right, so Amanda, I'll step in, and then if your mic would figure that out, please interrupt me, okay? So guys, your question about kind of what the public safety concern is there.
Right. I mean, I know you have it on here, but it just, yeah, I was curious what public safety only or, public access to.
I think it's public safety, but also it's this business that we all know we have an issue with a secondary access in the case of having to do a mass evacuation. That's obviously not set up for that. But right now, if there's any accident at all that blocks that road, we would end up with it would be corked kind of on both sides. So I think, and one thing Chief Weston proposed is the possibility of having it be locked except as needed. I mean, that's one possibility. So if the Toadstool neighborhood is concerned about that, that would be, or the mines, I mean, that's basically all the mines. That would be one option, but to kind of eliminate it completely is concerning.
And you mentioned DOT, but I mean, that's DOT's main access to the highway.
Yes,
So.
right. Yeah.
But actually, it's actually a little even worse than that, because at the moment there's access through to Sorrow Mall, there's access via, I think it's Gold Avenue, and Toadstool, as well as the junction. So there's kind of probably 4 access points now. This would reduce it down to 1. And we also have there's a lot more road there, which is vulnerable. Any accident blocking that blocks all access. And obviously we're now dependent on a bridge as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have one comment from some public members, Jennifer and Amanda, and that's just to interject with the first comment you have with wetlands and viewscape is that the Seward Highway is designated as a scenic highway, and if the monstrosity is put there, it takes away from this beauty, and then it's invading all the waterfowl and everything that lives on those wetlands. And visitors are constantly taking photos at that mall, and then of course we know they're also taking pictures from the tram and the mountain, and that's going to be in their photos too. And then I have more from more members of the public too. But another one was that option number 8 in the previous meetings that they gave us here in Girdwood, they thought would work nicely with maybe even more of an oval of the first roundabout so that the north-south was more direct and it would still benefit the slowdown of traffic and not be such a monster there size. So that is number 8 right here on the projector.
The other thing there is that I heard a suggestion that we could consider doing a pullout on the inlet side in place of the loop here, and maybe even a boardwalk. And to your point, Brianna, about the scenic highway, this community member was saying, you know, that's also a historic area. And there is kind of an issue with access right now. There are people who use that recreationally and there's no place to park. Plus the issue of the semis doing what they're doing right now. Ideally, with this kind of setup, especially if we can oval it or do something that's going to work for the semis, we could get rid of that parking that's happening along the guardrail there. But I think that there might be an argument to be made for turning that into a scenic area instead of an area with a gigantic. Oh, sorry, it's already a scenic area, an area with scenic access.
Amanda, your hand is up. Let's try your mic again.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, my internet died. Sorry about that. So I also wanted to point out that the new proposed route is in, you know, as we are worried about the wetlands, but another thought that's been pointed out is that those wetlands are pretty unstable, and imagining, I don't know how to build roads or, you know, these loopy things, but it seems like they would need a lot of fill brought in. And even that, what are they on? What's underneath them that, you know, the next big earthquake isn't just going to liquefy and crumble that infrastructure? Seems pretty crazy that I hadn't thought about before.
Thank you, Amanda. Guy?
Just one more question. Have you talked to Alaska Railroad about that as far as cutting off toadstool concerns?
Yeah.
Because, you know, I see them using that road quite a bit for maintenance and whatnot. So.
And when you're ready for another note, Jennifer, I have one for the 3rd point.
Yes.
And that was small town nature of the Girdwood community. And this was from a community member who's been here for over 40 years. And they were at a meeting 10 years ago with DOT that promised to listen to the concerns of the Girdwood community. And they feel this latest proposal definitely doesn't do that to continue the nature of our small community and slow down the traffic coming in. Definitely expedites. Any other comments from the board on these points to elaborate on, or further points for the?
Yeah, I got a point which probably relates to the 3rd one. So one of the changes which is sort of less controversial, probably in the big loop at the bottom, is moving Alyeska Highway to the west has the advantage of separating out Old Girdwood from or access to Old Girdwood from the mall. And I've heard positive comments about that. So that's probably in contrast to the business comments. We should reflect Old Girdwood's opinion as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
And I had some other comments, but you can probably wait until the meeting with DOT for those.
Okay. Yes, yeah. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Amanda.
Can we see the number 8 again and just see what, I didn't look when that was up to see what it did to Old Girdwood now that Mike brought that up, if it's not too hard to bring back up.
Should be up now. Here it goes.
You see it?
Yes, thank you. So it pretty much is using Old Girdwood as access for a good part of it.
Nearly all of the original designs used the residential streets in Old Girdwood as access to the mall.
What's the reason for not doing it?
Does anyone else from the board have a question?
I can answer you. I'm sorry.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I guess the reason they ended up with the alternative that we're seeing here was the result of the feedback they got from Old Town. And Old Town didn't want the streets developed down there because they already see enough traffic. So they wanted to try to limit the amount of traffic coming into Old Town. And they didn't want to improve it so that more people are venturing back into the neighborhood there. So they ended up with this, what do you see here? It seems like somewhere between the different alternatives that they showed before, they could still come up with a solution that protects Old Town, but still delivers upon, we've had several discussions on the side, there's a couple alternatives they have in here where it's like this one's a loop approach that comes in and connects that way. You could probably move this over. You could move this into over here, and then you could limit the interaction with Old Town and things like that. So that the main driver of that 7 or the one that they're preferring is because of Old Town's feedback and trying to keep people out of there.
Thank you, Kyle. Any other comments from anyone on the board? Great. Any comments or questions from the public? Kyle, your hand is up.
One positive we do like about it is that the bridge gets rebuilt. Right now, the bridge that does cross over the railroad tracks is not acceptable crossing to railroad standards. And so it would be relocated and rebuilt, which then could help with putting a more safe connection to the lower Diderot and the Bird to Gird Trail, which we can't do right now because railroad won't let us do it. So now everybody just goes really close to the railroad tracks down there, which is sort of an unsafe situation. So, and the bridge, the pedestrian bridge that crosses over the railroad tracks now is that style of bridge that collapsed in Anchorage, where the log truck went across and it collapsed. It's that style. It's been rebuilt, but it's still glulands holding the decking up on the side. So at some point that lifespan is going to be done and it needs to be replaced. So it's one positive with rebuilding the bridge with this project, which wasn't originally in their scope, but now they are including it.
So that would be worth mentioning, some positives.
Correct. We tried to get that in there, and at first they said no, but now they've included it.
Okay. And you can come forward closer to the table with the mic on it. Would be great. Yes.
Hi, Soren Worth. I've been in Girdwood now for 20 years. But I guess my question, and I was originally on the board a long time ago, but where is the funding prerogative coming from? Is this, because I thought there was a STIP process that Girdwood would tell the DOT, this is what we want. And, 20 years ago, there was a price tag for the roads in Girdwood that was something like several $1 million. And that money never came through from DOT, from the federal government. Well, it came through, but it was never used for the priorities that we came up with on the road committee. And it still hasn't. So I'm wondering, 35 million, all of a sudden there's this money. Is there some commensurate money to fix up Girdwood roads? Why is DOT choosing where to use its money instead of Girdwood saying this is what we need and you should fund these projects because they have a higher priority? I've been, just from personal driving that road, I have not seen a problem with that highway, and this to me is a huge commitment of resources. And, a lot of people I've talked to said this is a waste of money. And I just wonder, and the other thing I'm concerned about is somebody who commutes on that road every day. I can say for 20 years, pretty much of routine commuting, that it seems like there's delays constantly on that highway. Are we looking at more future delays for a project of dubious merit when there's not really any need? So, I guess fundamentally I'm asking DOT, where's this coming from?
Thank you. Kyle, do you have any response to that?
Well, I'm not DOT, but DOT gets federal funding. So Alyeska Highway and the Seward Highway are considered federal funded highways. So the DOT would apply for federal funds through our representatives. And they would, state Alaska would pay 10% and the rest of it all come in federal funds. That's how all the improvements on the Seward Highway are done.
So you're saying this was a congressional, there was something from one of our Congress people that said this is what we need, or?
Well, no, there was a resolution by the Board of Supervisors, also brought by the Girdwood 2020 at the time, but Girdwood Alliance that requested for improvement at the Alyeska intersection. So that was probably submitted years ago, but it's finally come forward now that DOT has put it to the top of their priority list to take a look at. And then they do an initial design, they come up with the costs, and then they go to the federal government to ask for the funding. It comes from fuel tax.
Can I just add to that? I think it was 2018. In the project where they did the change of the bend in of replace the bridges between here and Telegon Pass and change they're working on the bend now portage. That project moved all the way up to mile 90. So what we noticed was that project scope included this section here. And because of the way they funded it, they could get money to basically do a design using that approved funding that was already there. Just the design work though. So what GBOS passed was a request that DOT use the money they already had and were not spending as part of that project to come up with a design. And that's all they've done. I don't believe there's any commitment or any funding source set up for the actual project for doing the construction work or anymore. I don't believe there is.
Well, they have funding committee at least for design.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, for design, which was what we'd already asked. So what we actually asked for 4 years ago was for them to do the work to come up with the design. And unfortunately, this is the design they've come up with.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the public or comments? Thank you, everyone, for participating in this important topic, and Jennifer and Amanda for your work on this. We will have our meeting with DOT on September 14th, so we'll have more opportunity then to bring comments.
And I'll rewrite this with the comments from me.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Move to agenda item number 2, discuss process regarding requests for action by GBOS from committees and the resulting action by GBOS relative to resolution 2022-14 Fulton Hills. Who would like to speak to this first? Okay.
I can speak to our staff, can.
Want us to speak to it?
I said you can or I can.
ahead.
Either of us can start. So I think we all know the history of this. So LUC, there was a proposal brought to LUC which included draft language. LUC passed it. GBOS, we received it, we wrote it differently and passed that. And the question, I guess, in front of us is pretty simple. Is GBOS duty bound to take any language and wording and everything given to us by LUC and just say yes or no? Or is GBOS allowed to actually generate their own resolution and pass that? And I think it's pretty obvious. LUC is an advisory body. What was actually requested in the motion from LUC isn't a kind of practical thing. We go back to the minutes. The actual resolution at LUC was to cancel or amend the request for proposals, but I don't think that's what anybody wanted, and it doesn't actually make any sense in the context. The thing that was in operation, the thing that was actually guiding the project was the development agreement. So I think if we had, our process for the last many years has been that a request for purpose comes from LUC, and it's either there may be a draft coming with it or not, but GBOS as the body actually writes that as a resolution and passes it, which is what we took here. If the intent, if we change that so LUC defines the exact language and we have to either agree with it or completely disagree with it, then we're going to do a lot more work in LUC to actually make sure that what we're asking for is correct and all the details are right. And we're going to end up spending a lot more time redrafting things in LUC, which, you know, is an acceptable choice. It's just going to take a lot more time. And because that wasn't the process and that isn't the way we've done things in the past, I know I didn't spend any time doing that at LUC, but we could do in the future.
Thank you, Mike.
So actually, can I just say one more thing?
Yes.
So I guess if we go back, so really the question is, what does LUC actually pass on to GBOS? Is it a set of exact language, or is it a concept and a request for action? We've taken the approach over many years that it's a concept and request for action, not a list of specific words and language we have to use.
Thank you, Mike. Jennifer?
Just a question. So this letter was not drafted in LUC, right? It was presented to LUC?
Yeah, it was presented to LUC. I don't think there was any amendments made through LUC. I don't remember anything.
Well, the second time it came around, Lynette, correct me if I'm wrong, we talked about, there was some more clerical things to kind of clean up on the letter.
Yeah,
That-
those
Yeah,
intent
That
stuff
sound-
through all the way,
Okay, so there were
Yeah.
amendments between the first and
but
second.
pretty minor.
very minor.
Yeah.
But there were no amendments made during the LUC meeting where it passed.
No, not that I recall.
I didn't see any amendments, and I don't remember it.
To answer your question, Guy.
Yeah, I think so. And it was written by the Chamber of Commerce. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So I have a question. So, one thing in the minutes, it does say, from Lynette, Chamber is willing to work with GBOS and community, determine it's fair and reasonable, willing to work with powers that be. That was from I'm assuming pertaining to like, well, how do we craft this letter that's reasonable for the GBOS to move forward? Is that a reasonable assumption, Lynette?
I have not read the minutes, but I know I reached out before the edited version was presented and voted on with wanting to discuss where commas and periods, et cetera, were put, but I still am personally feeling like a huge point that the chamber had in their letter of resolution, that if the development agreement was not amended to what the RFP said it would do and what the business community felt it needed in this community observed, that it should be canceled or voided. And that was taken out. And so basically, I think people talking feel like we're saying we want this amended, but there's no afterwards. And that I feel the community really doesn't want this project to go forward if it doesn't address community. And so if policy was not followed as we understand it, that the letter that was drafted that the community had opportunity to weigh in on and assess and discuss at the land use and was presented to GBOS, that what should happen, the way I understand policy, is that GBOS should carry forward the letter that the community supported and the chamber as an organization drafted. And they could write a letter why they don't agree the contract should be voided if they don't amend it to the needs of the community with public land. And that is what I would like to see tonight, is that if GBOS really sticks with their letter, that the development can continue, even if they don't amend it, then that letter could be written saying that you think that there's a benefit to the community regardless. But the community spoke. There were 40-some people in the room, plus a board that had multiple meetings to craft something that we thought was a win for our community. And I don't feel that GBOS is following the will of the people who elected them to sit at the table, personally.
So part of my question is, when GBOS put this resolution together, was there communication with the Chamber of Commerce?
Not with the Chamber of Commerce. They sent it to Lynette on Friday before it appeared in any packet. But there was no communication with the Chamber because I thought Lynette was putting it forward, not the Chamber. I don't know who the right.
And there was no back and forth with us talking about what should we do.
I gave you a draft of it several days before the GBOS.
There wasn't any dialogue between the two of us to sit down and craft something, or to have the ability to go back to my board and say this is, pardon?
Did respond to me.
We did not sit down together and put.
We did not
something-
sit down, no, we didn't.
We did not put something together that we felt was what the community was saying they wanted, or the board that took the time to draft the letter and then come forward with any edits. And my feeling when the letter was shelved for edits, I was thinking commas and semicolons, not the guts of the letter. And I felt that was weird.
Jennifer, did you have one before the gentleman in the audience?
Sure. I think maybe the question is, quote unquote question before us might be framed a little differently. I think another way to look at this is whether or not the relationship between LUC and GBOS can function roughly similar to House of Representatives and Senate. And so if you come out with two different things, then you meet together and figure out, what's different, what you want to keep, what you say. Otherwise, the way we ended up interpreting this, it works a little bit, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like two bodies with different jobs of representation. It worked as GBOS saying, well, the five of us actually know better than the 40 people who showed up for LUC. And that's the message to the community, whether we like that or not, or whether we want to view that the way, particularly because GBOS ended up refusing to even talk about the LUC language. That motion wasn't seconded, and I think we at GBOS need to take a look at that. I thought that was poorly done, and that we need to take a look at that. I think looking back at our operations manual, that these two bodies were designed to work like House of Representatives and Senate, where if you disagree on something pretty fundamental, and this is fairly fundamental, about really critical to the community, the single most important issue for the community right now, we should be working together to agree on language, and not the five members of GBOS or 4 or 3 saying, well, we've got the majority, this is what we're going with, and we're not even going to talk about what was passed. So that would be what I have to say about it. I think that we need to look at this pretty seriously. The question is not whether GBOS can use its own language. The question is whether GBOS can decide its own language without ever discussing LUC language and then moving forward with it without ever circling back to LUC.
Mike?
Just a question perhaps to staff. I don't have the minutes with me. Could you check to see if there was any discussion at that meeting? I know there wasn't a seconded resolution or a seconded motion, but my recollection is there was lots and lots of discussion at that meeting about the precise language which the chamber had proposed.
At the GBOS meeting?
GBOS meeting.
When you guys passed the motion?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let me.
It was not, the particular motion which Jennifer proposed was not seconded, I agree. But there'd be plenty of discussion after that point. The characterization of it was better discussed.
Okay, sorry, let me clarify. We refused to discuss the language that we were So my motion was particularly to discuss the difference between LUC and GBOS. So while we did talk about the letter quite a bit and the wording of the letter, we never seriously considered, and that's not good.
Okay, I don't believe that's the case. I think we had plenty of discussion about the difference in language. We just didn't have a motion because there were 2 votes for it.
Actually, we're not, well, if we did that, we shouldn't have, because you're not supposed to talk about these.
Well, that's the way we do. That's the way we do it. You have a discussion on the motion and then that was an amendment.
We did it very poorly.
Yeah.
This was not, we are being called out for something that can be read out loud.
I think, just to clarify, we had a motion so we could discuss it, and we did discuss it. And then when you proposed the amendment didn't get a second.
To be frank, we discussed.
So we had
our
the discussion.
wording, but we
had this.
clearly
Okay,
refused to
well,
discuss
maybe
anything.
the minutes will clarify for us, or the recording.
I think it's going in 2 different directions, that conversation. Whether there's discussion or not, it didn't follow and bring the public in.
I'll take one. Okay, Margaret has it.
Item number 12, and we can pull it up. It's the minutes from, sorry, scrolling up, very small screen, July 18th. It's on page 4.
Yeah, I got it right here. Okay, so this is agenda item 12. And several motions. Yes. First motion is GBOS moves to approve the resolution. That motion was seconded by, the motion made by Mike, seconded by Amanda. There was discussion, explains that each suggested amendment to the original draft supplied by the Girdwood Chamber addresses productive engagement with the newly formed Fulton Hills Advisory Committee and perform the impact studies as amended to the development agreement. And then Jennifer Wurgard requested stronger language and recommends that GBOS add back in the language that removed from the original draft by the Girdwood Chamber LUC. Lorraine Doran also requested that development agreement be voided. Agreement being voided be added back to the resolution. And there was a motion to move to amend the draft resolution to remove the redundant paragraph and to add language about deed restrictions to the 16th whereas statement. And that was passed by the board 5-0. And then Brooks Chandler states that the resolution is different from what was considered at land use. HLB has strayed from their own policy in Anchorage Municipal Code and historic precedent with the development agreement. He requests that GBOS be more aggressive. And Jennifer Wingard similarly stated that the resolution should address the cause of the problem, which is the process used by HLB on this project. And then there was a motion, GBOS moves to adopt the language originally proposed, the originally proposed resolution for the introduction and conclusion of the GBOS resolution. Motion by Jennifer Wingard, no second. This motion withdrawn since there was no second. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, sir, thank you for being patient. Come closer to the microphone. State your name.
Yes, I'm John Rentz, resident here, and just a couple of comments past and the future. On the past, I don't know that the discussion matters because sometimes errors are made. And when I look at this, it's not complicated. The overwhelming majority of people in the land process came out and said two parts of that resolution. One was fix it, and two was if you can't fix it, it needs to go away. The second part of that was dropped, and I don't believe that what you have is a fair response to that clear message. It came from an overwhelming number of people, so you ought to give that some thought. Looking forward, though, I've negotiated a lot of deals in my life, and I would hate to move forward with what you have put forward. How can you, in good faith, work and try to fix this if you're not willing to tell them that you want it to go away if it can't be fixed? You basically tied one of your hands behind your back in the negotiation. You have de facto supported Holton Hills because you have not in that resolution stated that it needs to go away if it's not fixed. So I think it's fairly simple, and I would urge you to fix that now and make it clear that this should go away if you cannot resolve those issues that you've laid out. So I think keep it simple. And the answer is to me pretty clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from, okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, it seems like there's two things going on here. One, broader subject, LUC, GBOS procedural. And the second, maybe more pertinent to tonight, is in regards to the resolution, put forth by GBOS. And then, I guess the difference between that resolution and what the Chamber of Commerce's letter that was approved by LUC. I think, on this last paragraph here, sort of to John's point, it seems like it addresses everything except for that part where, if these needs are not met, that whether it's GBOS, whether it's LUC, cannot be in support of Holden Hills development. And to me, that seems like that's the kernel of it right here. That the paragraph, otherwise, I think summarizes broadly the Chamber's letter, but to your comment, it does remove the teeth of the letter. And, I think that's a valid point. Now, how that, if GBOS can't move forward with that, then we get back to the larger issue of process. But, for the purposes of this resolution, if that's something that could be resolved tonight, then we could address the broader issue later. That's my comment.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank
you. Guy?
So that specific language or whatever, we can cancel this, or if it doesn't meet it. I mean, can this resolution do that? Can this board do that? Is that something that's within our power through this letter? I think we've listed in here the needs of the community and the kind of the feeling of the development and what we need, but can this resolution really have teeth? Can it cancel a project?
I think that if our community doesn't make an official statement that if they don't do what they were supposed to do in the RFP and what HOB was supposed to do by reach out to the community before there ever was an RFP, they didn't do that. And then if the RFP said, which it did, it was going to address workforce and affordable housing, which it didn't. And then if our elected officials and our community and our chamber, all these entities came forward and said, we don't want this if it doesn't do these things and you have failed to follow proper procedure. We don't want this in our community. It's public lands. It's our opportunity to serve our community and its needs. And I think everybody in this room knows there's a huge need for affordable housing, and our community and our businesses are suffering, and that is not part of this equation. And if you guys don't say that is important for our community, then if the assembly members and if the HOB advisory board doesn't hear that from you, then they're left to think, yeah, we'll try and we'll get a pass. And it's 150 acres of our land, developable or not. But that's how I think, is if your elected officials don't say it, that says something.
I think this letter does convey that. And I think our Holden Hills committee, that met today and we talked about it and a different ask that we discussed today and how we can build that into this project addresses that very directly. And although what their ask isn't, if you can't do it, we're not going to do it. Maybe we should add that at this point so we don't shut down their whole process and include that in, this has been put forward. I think it relays the point that what the community wants. And if we want to put the council clause, I mean, that would be up to that committee, but I don't see that ask in that committee either, so. I don't know if they have, or us have the power to do that.
It's not a statement of power, but it's a statement coming from the community officially that this is what we think. And if you don't say it, it doesn't register. And I do sit in on the housing things, and I do think that it's great, but it is still an ask that we're going to HOB and Connie. They are not bound to do anything, and they already signed a development agreement, and it did not have any workforce or affordable housing when they signed that document. And so I think any voice that we can carry forward as a group that says these are our needs is an important thing to do.
And that's what the committee's doing right now.
They're trying, but there's no guarantee that there'll be a resolution.
Okay, we have a comment from a board member, and then I'll take the next. member of public.
For clarification, I don't know if you could speak for the chamber, but in your original proposal, when it says, which is the sentence really under that we're arguing about here, if this is not possible, the current RFP proposal should be cancelled. Did you really mean the development agreement, or did you mean the RFP? Because the RFP happened and finished.
Paul was there when we did it, but I would say when we were drafting it, we were in the RFP stage and then the development agreement was signed. So that's where when we were fixing our typos, changed it to the most updated thing that.
So it was about the development agreement. Or it should have been.
When you and I were doing the edits, but at the time that the letter was drafted, there was nothing signed.
Understood. That makes sense. Thanks.
Betsy?
I realize this is a resolution, so it didn't necessarily ask for a response, but did you get any response about any of your whereases?
I didn't get any response.
Only informally. I mean, I definitely heard from when I spoke to Adam afterwards, he talked about it. So, yeah, but we didn't get a formal response. But they're talking to they're about to talk to the advisory committee as well next week or the week after. So.
Yes.
Hey, I just want to know how you actually.
Say your name, please, for the microphone.
Hi, my name is Ann Kaiser. I've been here for probably 25, 26 years. And I just want to know how you feel about it now. If you could go right this minute and take a look at what people have said and what we're trying to get across to you. Have your opinions changed about the way you're thinking about the community? That's my question to you, about what their desires are.
Any more questions or comments?
Hi, I'm Grace Pleasance. I reside here in Girdwood. I'm so glad that everybody's looking at your operating principles because there clearly is a set of procedures on how you're supposed to respond to documentation that comes from the LUC that goes back to GBOS. And to the extent that the chamber and the people of Girdwood voted in June of this year at the LUC and that language then moved forward to GBOS and was altered significantly, not in accordance to your operating procedures. And I am very disappointed, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation as a community because I hope going forward, as I understand from a couple of the board members, that it has been the policy recently in the past several years to amend documentation that comes out of LUC to conform to what US is thinking. But that's not what the operating principles say for your organizations. On the issue of talking about this, the chamber's resolution that came forward, and with respect to saying that this item, if we don't have these terms and conditions that we're proposing, whether it comes from the housing group or from the Chamber of Commerce to amend the development agreement, that you will walk away and we will advocate strongly that this Holton Hills is not the proper development at this time. I think that your resolution is fairly gutless. So I think that to the extent that maybe we ask the chamber, I don't know if that ask has been made today, to say that what do they want to do since it was their resolution and that the people that were there and voted, I think it was at 42 or 46-1 in support of saying it either gets amended or it gets canceled. That's the message. It needs to be very clear and simple. And I think that unfortunately, because the actions that were taken by GBOS, it's muddied the situation a little, but I think that it's certainly it certainly opens up the opportunity tonight to kind of go back and say, how do we fix this? And if it means sending another resolution from LUC back to GBOS, or I think you have some ideas of how you want to handle this, that message needs to go forward because in the next coming months, at the beginning of this month in September and October, you have a developer that is going to be seeking approval at the assembly level, at the Planning and Zoning Commission, at the plating board. And if they don't hear from this community that says, we do not approve this development unless it adds the issues of workforce housing and addresses the issues of this community, they're going to get approval. And if we don't have something in writing documented, I think we have a problem here. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments from anyone online? Anyone on the phone? Any other ones? Any other discussion from the board?
Well, so yeah, to Kevin's, sorry,
Mike, go ahead.
No, that's all right.
I was just going to say, to Kevin's point, I feel like you outlined it's two different things.
That's how that's how I see it.
No, I think it is. There's the substance of the letter of resolution itself, and then there's also the process. So I think before we move beyond this, we should figure out if we can, if we can reach some resolution about one or the other. Is that done? Right?
I think that's a great idea, Jennifer. So we could talk about the first identified by Kevin, which was the broader issue of, I think you said procedural, but if something goes to land use, this might be rewriting something and require more work for all of us. But something that comes to LUC, and this is a resolution, it is not a letter, it was a resolution. And so it begins with whereases, and that was passed and not very much edited. And then it came to GBOS, and that's where it was edited with more whereases and more thoroughly. And well, I don't want to go on about my thoughts, but we just need to decide if that process has to be edited in the first place at land use with less comments, really, because another meeting is more vetting of data and information. And the supervisor of land use, that's their role, to write that resolution, essentially. Just like if it was fire department, then it would have to be that supervisor's role to write that resolution with the secretary's help. And nobody else's edits. That's where it's sticky a little bit, because the chamber wrote the letter, and they could send that letter to the assembly, and they could do lots of things to the assembly so that you're heard that route. But when it goes to two routes, I feel like it should be edited at both of them to be more clear and coming from both community as a whole. Any other thoughts from the board on?
Well, if, frequently when things, I'd say, Mike, you can probably speak to this, but when things come through or first brought up at LUC, they're sort of fleshed out during the meeting. So we don't have time to properly word a letter of support, a letter of non-objection. And so, sometimes, again, frequently when we vote on something, we try to hammer it out the best we can, and then it's, I guess, summarized, if you will, by Mike, right? Then it goes to, or with Margaret's help, and it goes to GBOS. And I think that almost always works. Up until, this letter, we haven't had a real hang up in some time with that. And so, in terms of efficiency for the land use meeting itself, unless, for instance, with this example, like the letter from the Chamber of Commerce isn't phrased as a resolution, to your point, Brianna, correct, right? So it needs some editing, or it has to be formatted properly. Now, I guess, back to this, when the chamber, and I don't want to say the chamber's, a separate entity from land use, as I read this as a land use person, I say, it really touches on the spirit of that letter, except as a big exception, we would not support this going forward unless these things are addressed. So, that's to me the big thing missing in this resolution.
And to chime in there, Kevin, the motion does say amend or cancel the RFP, which has since been clarified to be the development agreement, but the letter says amend.
Mm-hmm.
It does not say cancel, and it does say or in the motion at that meeting. Did one of you next to Kyle have your hand up? Okay. Surens?
It's hard to, it's always a little difficult. I know you guys have a terrific job, and I think when you ask what your powers are, I think your powers are zero in all of this. I think you are essentially, and I guess my appeal is you are essentially the de facto leaders of a community, a part of Anchorage that was treated totally differently than any other part of Anchorage ever is. Imagine going into Sand Lake, not talking to their community council, and developing 60 acres, 90 acres. It would be all over the paper. It would be everywhere. For whatever reason, we are getting screwed, and your community knows this. Now, there's some people who like one thing or another, and unfortunately, in all of these, the whereases don't really mean very much. The whereases are one guy's idea, and somebody throws this in and that in. I think it's almost irrelevant that it was rewritten. I think you did a pretty good job on the whereases, but they don't mean very much. We all know that the real issue here is the workforce housing. That seems to be a ubiquitous issue. There's going to be a lot of other details to work out. There's a list as long as my arm, but the negotiating team is basically going to have to do their best in those ideas. You just can't move forward, in my opinion, as leaders, losing one of the two key pieces of that chamber letter. If you look at the chamber letter, it's fix it or stop it. And I don't understand why anyone would not want to do that. I don't understand as leaders why you would want to take out that option for your dialogue with a city that has treated Girdwood entirely different than any other neighborhood. So, I guess I would try to get out of the details. You'll never be able to negotiate this thing tonight or amongst yourselves. You just got to get to the city with no power, just the power of your leadership, and see what you can do and support the community in trying to end it if it's still a mess, and do it right. Because I haven't heard anyone obstructing on this. I've only heard people who want to do this right. So I think you can carry your flag pretty high. And those are my comments. And I wish you did have some real power with it.
Thank you.
Just comment. I think.
Yes.
I thought John summarized that very well. We don't have a veto. GBOS doesn't have a veto. Citizens of Girdwood don't have a veto on this. It's about how you can use the power you do have. So it's about the influence we have during the process. It's about the influence we have at the assembly. Ultimately, that's probably the closest thing we have to a veto. And I guess there's just a difference in strategy that saying up front, as you've been involved in many negotiations. There are negotiations where you do not go in first thing saying, I will walk away if you don't give me what you want. There are negotiations where you go in and use soft power and engage as far as you can, and then withdraw when there isn't appropriate engagement from the other side. That's one way of doing it. Another way is going in and saying, if you don't get exactly what I want, I'm walking away. If you're buying a used car, maybe that's the right way to do it. So there's a difference in strategy here. And I think that's the key point here. I think the characterization that not having a single line in that first resolution means we can never withdraw support from it is completely false. We can, at any point, we can withdraw support from the project. What we're saying is we'll try and get workforce housing in there. And as the letter says, whereas it says it's a critical part of the project, it's a critical need. And if we don't have those critical needs, we're not going to support the project, of course. So I completely disagree with the characterization of removing that sentence, means we will never, we will have to support the project, whatever it is. That's just false.
I didn't say that.
You didn't, but other people have characterized it.
I don't believe it. I don't believe that.
Good.
What is written out is what the people that are pushing for Holton Hills read. That's all they really hear. What you've said is that there is a strategy. So I guess I would ask you, what is the strategy that allows you to omit the clear statement that if you can't succeed in your dialogue, then you will oppose it? So what is the strategy moving forward that is being followed that allows you to do that?
I can only speak for myself. I mean, a strategy is to engage productively with the process until it cannot give us the outcomes we need. It's clear that it won't give us the outcomes we need, or there isn't productive engagement from the other side. And the question is, where we do have influence, what's the best process that's going to give us maximum leverage at a later stage? And I don't know the answer to that. Nobody knows the answer to that. It's a judgment call.
Okay,
Anyway,
all members of the board believe that that's the strategy, and I guess I'll just wrap up here. I know it's going a long time, but.
Kevin.
I would add one.
Oh, okay.
And not that I'm aware of any, like overall strategy. But, there has been this working group put together, specifically to address Holton Hills and to have a dialogue with Connie Yashimura and Adam, who's basically running HLB. So, it's not like it's like inaction. This committee is, or I should say working group is tasked with basically taking what they hear from the community and in a more efficient way than a room with 100 people, bringing that forward to HLB and to Connie. So, again, I'm not aware of any like overriding strategy, but I think that's our kind of best way of getting it. At least Connie is, whether it's how sincere it is, I don't know. I can't know that, but at least she's willing to engage in that sense. And so, maybe to Mike's point, like, we're not coming in hard like it's buying a used car, but we are trying to, have some engagement with the developer and HLB.
Thank you, Kevin. And one thing I would also add to echo some of the statements you've already heard was that at the previous meeting, we highlighted on July 18th, there was discussion about leaving an opportunity in the future to say something more profound or more toothsome, like you're saying, because if we said it too early, that would be probably the wrong strategy, because we are in the middle of creating a housing working group for the Housing Advisory, Holton Hills Advisory Committee, and to give them a task they are taking very seriously and working really hard on and volunteering. So to cut their act short by just coming forth with our two main demands kind of at that stage was feeling too soon at that meeting and previous meetings. So that is what I'm thinking right now for hopefully an answer. But we still have, we could change something in the future with how we say it. Once the the advisory committee meets with us next week, they have some language they'd like to introduce that we say exactly to Connie and Adam Trombley. And they say that they are willing to work with us. And that's better than us saying, we don't want your development at all. And they're saying they'd like to. Guy?
Yeah, I guess as far as strategy goes, or, I didn't talk to Mike about the strategy on this, but just kind of my principle on this is, the all or nothing, I don't see it working in politics. We just are all 50-50 and nothing seems to work. And so though Girdwood Board of Supervisors really doesn't have any teeth, HLB does. And we need to engage with them because it's their land, and if we don't do it right,
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, you could say that, I mean, but they're the landowners.
That's the
It
problem.
is
They
that-
think it's their land.
Well, that's a bigger issue, but I mean, right now, you know, it's
It is.
HOB and so, I mean, they're the ones. So I think we need to be able to engage with them and use our Holden Hills committee to continue that and to bring teeth to it and our chamber to bring teeth to it and our community too. But we have to, you know, that's my strategy is it states in here about workforce housing, about, you know, affordable housing, everything we want to see, because I couldn't afford to buy my house right now.
Oh,
You know, I bought it almost 30 years ago, and so I couldn't afford it. So we need to see that, so we can see people move to our valley and live here. But that's,
Jennifer?
Just a couple things that we've got a lot being discussed at several different, trying to circle back around just a little bit. I want to come back around to one quick process point. I want to just have to ask that as members of GBOS and as members of land use, I hope we pull away from a habit I think we've fallen into of characterizing people's testimony or opinions and then labeling them as categorically false. I think that is not our role and we should not be doing that. And it keeps being repeated. So we need to stop doing that. That is bullying behavior that interferes with public testimony. Now, circling back around, I think it's interesting to hear these discussions about strategy because there is certainly a point to be made about it. And I think there's a lot of value to that, and maybe it's even right, but it's interesting because it's not a conversation we really had at the time, and it just should have been a conversation that we had with land use. We should have circled back around land use, even if we're all absolutely, even if it was a 100% vote across the board, all five of us were like, no, you know what, we need to not come out too strong on this. We should have circled back around to land use because the land use voted at 90-something% in favor of that letter. It was with an understanding of what that letter meant. It wasn't about the whereases. It was about the ask. They didn't. That letter was passed and well discussed, but it was about, are we ready to make this demand land use? And when they voted like that, it became a land use letter. It's no longer a Chamber of Commerce letter. It was presented by Chamber of Commerce, but when land use voted for it at 90-something%, it became the voice of the Girdwood community through land use. And so if GBOS doesn't want that to go forward, I think we need to come back to land use and say, okay, we heard you, but we don't think that's what we should do. But I don't think we should say, we heard you, but you're wrong. And it's all about strategy that we're not going to actually touch back because we understand the strategy of this and it's our role to be the strategist. Like that's got a funky dynamic to it that I don't think anyone meant. I don't think it was meant on purpose, but that's what happened.
Okay, sir?
My name is Paul Rasmussen, sorry for interrupting, but that got me going there because it's our land, not theirs. You guys are starting to go to, it's all or nothing. It isn't all or nothing. HLB didn't follow the rules. Connie took advantage of it. And we're standing here right now going, well, it's all or nothing. We should negotiate different. HLB didn't follow the rules that they have. What's so hard about going, hey guys, you didn't follow the rules, go back and do the right steps that you're supposed to. And if you can't, then this thing goes away. That's not all or nothing. That's telling them to do what their job is supposed to be, not just us going, oh, well, we might can negotiate this or that. No, they didn't follow the rules like the government makes us all do all the time.
Mike?
It's a good point, an interesting point. The problem I have is HLB rules don't say they have to have any input from communities. That's not in there. The way the RFP was structured, the RFP is a proposal, and then they can negotiate a completely different development agreement from that. I mean, we haven't got, there's nothing I found that I can point to in the rules and regulations that they're supposed to follow that they didn't do. There's lots of stuff they should have done if they wanted to be a good partner. And if they want to be respectful of the community, they absolutely should have done that stuff, but they're not required to, unfortunately. That's one of the many problems of HOB. They can go off and do their own stuff, independent of what the community wants, as long as it follows the area plan, in our case, the 95 plan, and maybe the Crow Creek neighborhood plan. So, I mean, I agree with you. They didn't do the right thing, but what they're actually required to do by code is really limited.
Grace, and then
So with respect to RFPs, I've done in my life, in my business, probably at least 40 different RFPs in different jurisdictions. I've never seen an RFP come through a process where when you have a party of three, which in this case, the RFP was awarded to a group of three entities, Alyeska, Pomeroy, Seth Anderson, and Ms. Shamir with CY Investments. And it specifically called out in the RFP that the capital partner of this development was going to be Pomeroy Alyeska. To have a year later come forward in a document called the development agreement without those parties and the capital partner missing from action in this context and not notifying the HLB folks, the HLB commission, or the community that the property's in, any other place in the country, that RFP would have been null and void at that moment. And why that moved forward, I don't know. I don't really care. I think like John Rentz has said, I mean, the issue right now is to tell the city of Anchorage, because I'll tell you, HLB has no power with respect to the movement of this development. At the moment, because we have an authorized development agreement in place that has been signed, they can vote in favor, but it has no authority with going forward in the current municipal process. The ultimate decision will be at the assembly level. And to be honest with you, at the ultimate decision to get her permit to develop the site development permit, that will come from planning and zoning. That won't even come from the city of Anchorage. I mean, the assembly. The assembly is only going to be dealing with two issues. Can they get the rezoning that they need, and upzone and changing of the accepting of the replatting? And then to the extent that there are some business transactional terms that may have to be approved by the city of Anchorage in the transfer of the land from HLB to a private entity, that's the only reason where the assembly comes into play. PUD will be decided at planning and zoning, not at the assembly level. So HLB really, they could make an announcement to them or not, and it really doesn't matter. But I think our wording that comes out of this group, whether it be LUC, and I totally support what Jen has said, according to your operating principles, it says right here, the Board of Supervisors shall include the official actions of the Land Use Committee without changes. That is one of their options, or one of your options to deal with. And without changes is very clear. No modifications, no editing. So either you accept it or if you don't. And then if you don't accept it, you've got B and C to deal with. So in the future, I hope we go back to procedures of how you have to operate. But with respect to the issue, which is really the crux of this matter, is does this community make it very loud and clear, either in another letter, in another motion, however your boards decide to deal with, to say to the city of Anchorage, we do not, we had a vote at our more or less our council level, and the community voted against this project going forward if it does not make changes. That's, it's simple, and it may be considered an all or nothing. I will tell you, negotiating lots of property for my types of development, I have to put a line in the sand. I'm not going to be wishy-washy of having another negotiate. When I have a development agreement that's signed, I'm not making changes to my development agreement. Why would I? I mean, the leverage is gone. We lost our leverage when we didn't even know the leverage was being lost. And that's how we ended up in this situation. So at the moment, I think the louder and the stronger message that comes out of this community is that we have very clear wording to the city of Anchorage. We do not support this. And this was something that came about really in May of this year, because the chamber, it took them, 2 months? I'm going to say 2 months before they could have an agreement to their memberships, and their membership then voted before saying, let's bring it to LUC. And that was in your June meeting. And so that in the June meeting, as I recall, then LUC voted. It was an affirmative of, we don't support Holton Hills unless you make this amendment and slash cancel it. It went to GBOS in your June meeting. And it was at that meeting that I remember, I think Mr. Edgington said, we have clerical errors. We need to revise this. And so we'll postpone it for a month. And that's why it came to the July meeting. And when at the July meeting, it was a completely different document, and which got approved. And then shortly thereafter got brought, I think within days, to the HLB commission to be presented to them and saying, this is the word of Girdwood. And it was not the word of Girdwood. So, I mean, to remember the historical lineup, and I mean, I agree with you, you have a housing committee that kind of got set up after this process, but this has been in the works for months. I mean, and so here we are, what do we do? I think a message needs to be very simple and very clear. Thank you.
That's your hand. Was that you? Okay, and then I know a lot of you already know this because you were at the June meeting and July meeting, but we wrote a letter when we postponed that item, that the resolution version from June, because we had a very large meeting the very next day, or 2 days later, GBOS wrote a letter and it was CC'd to all the municipality of Anchorage. So we did do something in that in the postponement of the month to address it. Soren, come up, please.
Yeah, Soren Worth again, and you know, it's kind of like, here we are again. There have been 3 meetings, as everyone here knows, and that involved the community. One packed this room, and the message from the community has been unequivocal. We do not want this project, particularly without the housing. And, you know, we're faced here with some big odds. You know, we have like one of the richest, most powerful developers in the municipality. Yeah, but she is one private individual. We are a community, and the Anchorage Assembly should represent the voice of the community. That's the way democracy works. And I know how tempting it is to try to negotiate with very wealthy, powerful people. It's tempting. But we need to stick with what this community wants. We need a message that is very strong and that says, no, sorry. We need, you come forward with this idea, you're going to make, she stands to make millions of dollars, but I'm sorry, but this is not what Girdwood wants at this time. There's no workforce housing. We have this real serious problem. And again, this is just like the Cloverleaf. I just want to remind you that in 2002, we had some of the most powerful people in the state who proposed a project in Girdwood. It was a rail spur that would run right up to the hotel. It was endorsed by Senator Ted Stevens, by former Governor Bill Sheffield, who was running the railroad, and by the governor, Tony Knowles. They all supported this project. Well, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors and the Land Use Committee, they all voted in opposition, but they wanted a stronger message. And so what they decided to do was hold a community advisory vote. The advisory vote was non-binding. And they had voting stations. The vote against the railroad spur was something like 83%. And as soon as that vote took place, the message that these important politicians got, that the city got, that the newspaper got, was Girdwood does not want this. Sorry, Girdwood does not want this. And if we are to be successful in getting what Girdwood wants, we need a strong, simple message like that. I'm sorry, we can't play around because we will be bulldozed, like many of these people are saying. So we need to present the message that was that forceful message that we had up to 3 meetings. Should we have another meeting? Is that what it's going to take? Should we have a vote? Maybe we should. But if we begin with this kind of like wishy-washy language, well, we're going to get some sort of development and we're not going to like it. And there will be continual problems. And we're wading into a very murky situation. I think we just need to say, no, sorry.
Thank you. Mike.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask you a question for clarification? You said at the very beginning that the way you characterised Girdwood's opinion was we do not want the development, especially if it doesn't include workforce housing. So that's implying we don't want the development, whether it includes it or not. Is that what you think Girdwood?
I don't think, we had a meeting over here at the church. We had a meeting in here. That was the one that I helped organize with 3 other people. We had a meeting in here that I attended. There we had a meeting on the LUC that I paid very close attention to. It's all in public record. And the message that I heard was that, it's very disparate. There's all sorts of, there's somebody said, it's like as long as my arm. There's problems with it. We have a lack of services. We can't have all of these people moving into homes and we don't have the infrastructure. We had, I don't even want to go on with all the list, but housing was particularly.
Right here. Pages of the.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, thank you. Was particularly obnoxious. And I mean, it's quite evident, it's quite obvious. And the people, I think people are just tired of feeling powerless and, feeling like our voices aren't being heard. And, I really appreciate this comment that like, if this were to happen in Anchorage, in greater Anchorage, if somebody were to come in and propose a development, there would be outrage, complete outrage. And I think there has been that outrage. In fact, I think Girdwoodians have been quite nice and quite congenial up until, but I think that point is not going to last forever. Because people out here in our community are getting very upset by this. And if you do not bring that sentiment to the municipality, then you are trying to straddle a community and these very important political people. And if you try to do that, you will get torn apart because the community won't like you. And then the people in power will just write you off. That's what's going to happen.
So I think what I heard you say there is you do think the community doesn't want the development at all, even if it has workforce housing.
Well, I think people are.
I've heard very different.
I think people were very surprised that this project came up so fast, that all of a sudden, we all work. We have like jobs, we have these busy lives, and we don't have, like myself, I'm 12 hours a day. We don't have time to come to all these meetings. And where this project came from, the arrogance, the idea that somebody's going to make a lot of money, that Girdwood hasn't had a say in the project. That's the biggest problem right now, that we have not had a say.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you. Is anyone online waiting to speak or make comments? Okay. Crystal.
Hi, Crystal Hoke. So I guess when I for one was disappointed that the original resolution didn't go through because I did feel like it was missing the teeth. I really agreed with what Brooks had suggested at that very meeting. But and as somebody who's brought forward resolutions where I wrote the resolution and I presented it and then I had to do it again and then again. And then it gets finalized, right? It's 4 meetings. I'm familiar with the process. I have definitely written my own resolutions and I've also had resolutions provided to me that I then edit, so like I've been through this process, I guess. But what never has happened is the title gets changed. The title is always the same that I can recall, resolution is, land use committee, letter of recommendation, GBOS, letter of support, it's like the ask is always the same, where what was requested in the original resolution, which was provided at numerous meetings from the beginning. So it's like, if it wanted to be edited, it should have been edited the second go around of the second month. Because first of all, the title is totally different. And the last part is the whereas that came out of the final GBOS one was therefore be it resolved that the Girdwood Board of Supervisors requested the Heritage Land Bank engage with GBOS and the Holton Hills Advisory Committee. The Holton Hills Advisory Committee didn't even exist when land use voted 42-1. So it was creating this new, completely new element, which by the way, I think that Holton Hills Advisory is doing a great job, but it's just, the fact is that it was creating a new entity that didn't exist when the land use vote occurred. And that to me is a huge factor. The other reason is that I had several people that were really disappointed in, showing up to meetings is a lot of work and you can get meeting fatigue, which I know you guys are all familiar with meeting fatigue. And if we expect people to show up meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, they're going to die out. And that's how people win in the rat race of development, right? And so I felt like by not putting forward what had been submitted by the regular process, has occurred hundreds of times, discounted those people coming and participating in the meeting, those people that showed up to vote and to think that they were going to have their voices heard, and then they were not heard. They did not feel heard. I knew that I heard from them privately. So I guess those are my comments. I feel like it is different. The message was definitely different that got relayed to the meeting. And, we'll see what happens. I mean, I don't know where I even stand until I know what they're willing to do for Girdwood, because but I do know that if nothing changes, that I am not in support of this project at all. So, but I think Soren's right on the money. Girdwood wasn't part of it from the beginning, and that's the biggest issue. We always come back to it. We're going to come back to it again until they actually include us.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've heard some fantastic comments from everyone in the room and the board. I don't see any other comments online. We need to decide where to go from here. I'm not confident we can make motions at special meetings. Or wrong with that. But
That might be a question for you, but haven't we done that in the past where GBOS has a vote? And, but, as the LUC, it's just the 5 GBOS members. Am I remembering that correctly?
You are in a meeting. You're not in a work session, so you can make motions. So you can ask for the will of the body.
Yes. We've done it a couple of different ways.
Can make a comment?
yes, Guy.
I mean, I produce a lot of documents at work, and there's always a big review process in it. And that is one of the, I've been on the board now, not quite a year, but these resolutions do come out. And even as board members, if we're not the supervisor of it, it's hard to get a review and comments on something and a lot of times they've been through that 4-month process, right? They need to get out, or something needs to happen. And, as far as procedure wise, I don't know what we would do to fix this. I would hate to see us, if there's any changes, how does it go back to land use the next month and then the month after that, and push it on down the road, because this thing's happening so fast. You're right. I mean, really. Yeah, I mean, the RFP in April, the development plan, boom, boom, boom. Like you said, the Holton Hills Advisory Committee wasn't even there when you guys were talking about the month before. So this is happening super fast. So I don't know, as far as procedure wise, how do we make it where it's efficient, without putting it back on old business, new business, blah, 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 for 4 months down the road? Because if we waited 4 months on this, I mean, there's going to be a ton of change between now and then. So, but as far as procedure wise, I think there should be some way to at least get them back to the land use committee that's on it to review it before they go out, at least to have, if that's even possible,
Thanks, Guy. Kevin?
Well, I guess a suggestion. Again, I'm not on the board of supervisors, so this is a suggestion that, it seems as, the body is here, you can take action on this resolution, and I don't know if you can create an amendment or figure it on that last paragraph to say that the, the community cannot support this development unless, these, particularly the needs for workforce and mid-income housing are part of this development. And then also, I think important along with that is required MOA impact studies, codify changes through an amendment to the development agreement or through similar building binding mechanism, So I don't know if that's something that the board would entertain tonight, and if you're not comfortable with that, understood. And then, and if that is the case, then unfortunate if it is, but then we go back to our C, not an agreement, time sensitive, because I do think there is time sensitivity to this. And, it's pretty clear what happens, right, is the Board of Supervisors prevents their resolution, and then the Land Use Committee, will provide a written explanation of the dissenting GBO's action to Land Use Committee. And in sending the recommendations forward, will include the official actions of the Land Use Committee without changes. So that, to me, that's like the two paths. And of course, that's merely a suggestion.
I didn't understand your first point. Were you reading from the GBOS?
I was reading from,
last.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were you suggesting changing that or agreeing?
On the,
obviously we did pass it.
Well, the change would be, or amendment would be that the Board of Supervisors could not support the development unless these criteria or these demands are, maybe demands too strong term, but are met. So, and because I can't speak for everyone that was at Land Use Committee other than the fact that I was at these meetings. And I think, if the Chamber of Commerce people that were at these meetings would say, well, is this so different if that sentence is included to say we cannot support this development agreement unless this is met? I mean, is that so far off? Would you?
I think from not having recently read what GBO's crafted, the main gist that would want to be brought forward is that if it's not amended, that we recommend it be canceled, is what is missing that we would like carried forward.
And I would also add, I don't see that as a all or nothing. And that's not saying, hey, we are completely opposed to this.
I think everybody wants this to be a success.
Yeah, there's clearly people that don't want anything to happen, understood. But, as I've been through these meetings, I think whether it's acceptance, nobody's like, hey, this is going to be great. Maybe some people are, but most people are not. People on Girdwood anyway. So, but I think, again, it's not an all or nothing as I see it. It's like, hey, we're not completely opposed to this development. In fact, we think, as Lene said, this could be a success and we'd like it to be a success. But we don't think it can be a success without addressing workforce housing. That's my read on it.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that's very well said. Mike, did you have something?
Yeah, I've got a comment on that. So as has been pointed out, we have a meeting next week with the Holt Hills Advisory Committee. And they're proposing specific changes to the development agreement or something equivalent to that. That's probably a good point at which we can bring up this very thing. If this is exactly what we want, it has to contain these minimum things. So, do the red line about it. I don't think there's any value in going back a couple of months and changing things when the world has changed since and where we're looking forward to is different. So I don't see any need to change this. If NUC wants to go back and discuss it, obviously they're welcome to. But in the meantime, we're moving forward with the Holt Advisory Committee with their recommendations. We'll see them next week. We'll act on that probably. I expect we will.
The dog.
Oh. Someone's unhappy.
Is it yours? I thought it might have been one of my kids. Somebody has a dog. It's not heavy out there.
Thank you, Mike. And to chime in with the previous comments, my personal thought would be, in light of the meeting on the 7th, that they have a lot of items that they are working really diligently on to line up for the developer and HLB, and we could immediately decide at that meeting to write a resolution with the firm teeth in it to say at that final whereas or therefore with that comment, so that it's continuing to move forward, coming even stronger, and then before October, September, because everything is continuing to move, just as CYs continue to have their meetings. They're not. I don't know what to say with that. Jennifer, can you say something?
I just wanted to clarify.
Yes.
I know what you were saying. So you're saying that, assuming that it fits in with the tenor of what's coming out of HHHAC, that's awkward. That we handle it, rather than going back to confusing the issue, but we handle it by tacking it on to what their recommendations are.
Thank you. And I am saying that for next Wednesday, I believe it is, because they're ready to present it to us, and they've set that deadline. They're working with they've split into 2 committees with different tasks to bring us something. Would be better work instead of going backwards to try to change this and change the vote and go back to land use, and instead learn from this than to be more of a single voice of Girdwood with everybody. That's what I was going to say. Betsy, your hand was up first. Thank you.
Based on what the HHAC committee is working towards, they're kind of working towards negotiating something, and I think tacking on the end of it, or you need to make this null and void, is not going to be a good process.
Thank you. Any other brief comments?
So what if the committee, if the housing committee doesn't support adding this language that we're talking about tonight to their process? And I also wanted just to make a note for the record. The week of the 1st of July, there were a number of community members, including myself, that participated in putting signs in our community. And right now it stands at over 130 signs have been put in this community that say halt Holton Hills. And we've been very advocating even still on the Girdwood Inc.'s website, and continue to get requests for more signs in people's neighborhoods. So I think, to the extent that you've had not only a vote at LUC, you have 130 people who have paid for these signs in their yard. So it's not like they're being given the signs, they're actually buying the signs and putting them in their yard. So I don't know if you can respond back to what happens if the committee does not want to add this language. Where are we at this point with that then?
Thank you. Yes, you may.
Are you saying that, just for clarification, are you saying that everybody who put a whole Holton Hills sign in their yard wants the project to be completely stopped and not changed? Because I'm hearing the opposite.
At the moment it says stop.
Yeah.
And listen to this community.
But it means
the halt has several different, different reactions. But ultimately, this project is either not in the best interest of Girdwood, or we need to go back and talk and listen to Girdwood.
What can little words on that? They say
Girdwood deserves a better deal.
Yeah,
Girdwood deserves a better deal.
To say another item, the committee is a subcommittee of GBOS, so they are reporting to us. They are not agreeing or disagreeing with us or asking for our approval. They're just reporting to us. And in the best interest, they feel the community and all of you are acting with passion and love for this community. And that's where all of this is coming from. So everyone has a great motive behind what they're doing. So I think that what we learned from them on the 7th, we can put something really firm and make our deadline on that date as a board. Write something, Guy?
I agree with you going forward on it. And to your point, kind of, I totally get it because they are coming up with like, not demands, but you know, what we'd like to see. But I don't see putting that clause on the end of that is any different. In the end, you're saying, this is what we want or we don't want it. And I think that's the point. You know what I mean? It's what I get.
The committee is putting forth some ideas, like instead of, that there should be a system, and they have quite worked it out, that a Girdwood entity will receive some of the.
Sure, some of the land.
Some of the
And,
land.
yeah, exactly.
And how that's gonna work.
And deed restrictions.
And, you know, kind of take some pressure off Connie, because she doesn't really have to do a lot of workforce housing, because it's figuring out a different avenue to make that happen. So I think because that's what's being worked out in that group, to put the clause on the end or else is probably not
I guess my
to
point.
the benefit of that group.
I guess my point, isn't that what we're saying today? Isn't that what I'm hearing or else? I mean, so, you know, that would seem like to me going forward. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. They are negotiating, but we, you know, at that time, let them know there can be, you know, there is a line here and we're not going to cross it.
Jennifer?
So, Brianna, you were specifically talking about point number 2, right? This is the.
Or is it number 2 on the first
Mhm.
version?
Yes, yes. Right. So what it's specifically asking is actually that we end up, we can word it in such a way that we end up with a plan that obtains a resolution of support. If, so, yeah, we're asking for some things, and then if we don't get them, it says that the end result, we need a resolution of support. It doesn't say you have to give us every single thing, but whatever you come up with at the end, you need this resolution of support. Or we're asking that we go back to square one on this, right? Is that what I'm understanding? I think we can ask that. What we're asking, we're not saying you have to give us every single thing or whatever. We're saying in the end result, we need something that GBOS can support, right? So, but I understand your point. I do see, like, again, we're a little struck with what we're trying to negotiate and trying to be firm at the same time. It can be a tricky thing to do, but I think that they need to hear that this isn't just an ask. I think it's important not to put forward what comes from HHHAC as just an ask, and, you know, it'd be great kind of thing. We need to make sure this isn't about, hey, this would be great. This is about this. These are some ways you can make this acceptable enough to get a resolution of support, and without that, you're going to get something totally different. Right? Is that?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes. Any other comments from the board? Or Margaret, yes?
I wanted, unfortunately, to backtrack just a little bit. The letter that the GBOS sent to the assembly and to pretty much everybody under the sun in the end of June closes with this paragraph. While GBOS has yet to vote regarding support of the Holton Hills project, it remains difficult to see how any responsible body could support such a major development in Girdwood without any mechanism to address the most serious of our housing needs. So I really think that GBOS has begun the throwdown, and perhaps the last paragraph that we're talking about was omitted, but it was sent earlier. So and I guess at this point I'm speaking as a citizen of this community rather than my position with the municipality, but I feel like if you continue to say, we're going to rip this out from under you if you don't do what we want, I really think that this has been a phased approach, and maybe because some of this has gone on in different forums and different meetings, certainly, that some of our own seriousness about how we were going to leverage the power of the community in this has been somewhat forgotten. But I think that going forward, what we've, and in between, what we've seen is a lot of the board has changed, not this board, but all of a sudden the Crow Creek Neighborhood Plan is a thing. We didn't think it was a thing, but the pieces have moved around. So I really think that the GBOS could continue to move forward and continue to put language in that gives them more opportunity to go forward, more opportunity to continue to negotiate, more opportunity to see what there is there. I think the message that Girdwood is unhappy it's been heard. It has definitely been heard. The Holton Hills signs are super effective. And I think the idea that it all has to come from the Board of Supervisors it's an effective tool, but it is also very effective to have things coming from the chamber and having the community continue to speak and showing that the community is putting pressure on the Board of Supervisors in various ways. Like, all of this is good as far as getting ultimately to where you want to be, which is being listened to. As far as turning back the clock and making the missteps from the previous months go away, like, unfortunately, that's not going to happen. But they are listening to you. And I feel that the Board of Supervisors has spoken pretty well. They haven't been perhaps as forceful as everybody in this room would like to see all the time, but they have been that forceful intermittently. And I think there will be continuing opportunities with this negotiation that's coming up, while still giving full faith to the group that's working on what they're calling their asks, and showing that they support this group in trying to find common ground and trying to figure out who it is that they're negotiating with, whether it's the Connie Yoshimura or and CY Investments or the HLB, and who really is holding the cards. Because at some point, that's what I noticed in today's HHHAC meeting was, knowing when you're making an ask, who is it really affecting? And it's really complex. So anyway, my main point was the letter from the GBOS did have a pretty solid hammer at the end of it. And, I think it shouldn't be forgotten. And that letter did go to absolutely everyone under the sun. So.
And it says that
Thank you, Betsy. Betsy.
So that section that you're referring to says that GBOS requests that Heritage Land Bank engage with GBOS about community needs and mid-income housing and MOA impact studies, and change the development agreement based on the whereases. And has any of that happened? Has anyone contacted GBOS about anything?
Margaret.
Well, I would say that's at that point, the HHHAC got created. And so that is the body that I believe that's happening through.
Yeah, that's the mechanism at the moment.
Yeah.
Clear discussions.
And
yeah,
I mean,
if they attend one of the HHHAC meetings, and she's said, I've been down in Girdwood and I've seen all those signs, and I'm requesting that they be removed. And Sam Daniel, who is one of the co-leaders of that group, said, well, that doesn't have anything to do with GBOS or HHHAC, so we have no authority to tell people to come up or take a test.
Thank you. We do have 10 minutes left in the scheduled time, so please be mindful of that. Both of your hands kind of at the same time. So, Mr. Renz.
Let me be very brief. One concern I have raised it is that somehow we get bought off by a few acres of land, because we're not in a position yet. We're going to be in a position to do some great things, and we need Girdwood land, but it's going to delay years of getting that workforce housing. to suddenly put it back on us while you develop a large block of land and you don't have any workforce housing. Connie Oshimura recently presented this to contractors. She used the word luxury. Now, you can see how many of your folks that are doing the hard work around here are going to be in luxury. You can't stop there. There has to be a component at Holton Hills where it's not going to work for Girdwood. We're going to just become a resort, not a resort community. We'll lose the community in time. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. And with respect to a lot of hard work here, I'll just say strategy requires good strategy. The biggest reason it doesn't work is you find out when you really talk about it, you don't have the same end in mind. I think some of that exists here. I think if we polled every one of you and everyone, we'd find a lot of different ends in mind. And that makes it really hard for the folks that you have working to try to resolve this.
We've heard that from the community, as I think, as Soren said, there are 7 or 8 different strands of opinion. Some people want no development, some people want. So we have to find a point to coalesce around.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, on the chamber part where it said it was following the RFP, and if you're not following it, then it needs to end. And now we're kind of discussing about, well, should we put it in with the triple HAC or whatever it is? The original resolution was around the chamber for the RFP. And so while we're also getting a sense of while we're sitting here discussing this, Connie's going ahead going, oh, come on, we'll just lead you along and I'm just still going to build it and make all my money and go home. And so kind of just, or it is sitting there looking like idiots, I guess, as she's going forward with her plan and not doing anything because we're all arguing about should we put it in or should we not do it. You know, so she's taking advantage of us at the town. So
I was going to check one more time for anyone online. So please raise your hand if you'd like to say something, or if you're on the phone. And it's left Jennifer.
I just wanted to make a suggestion. It seems like we're probably not going to get a resolution on exact wording about anything tonight. But we do have a chance in very short order to talk about this again and to say, and we can, I think we can say that we've heard, we want strong language somehow, making the city know that whether we put it as a do or die statement or whatever, I think we know the community feels strongly about this, and we can find a way to express that one way or the other, and we can certainly invite more feedback about ways to do that at the next meeting. I think there'll be more discussions about this. So I wonder if with our last 3 minutes, if we could circle back around to the process question just real quickly, because I feel like that is kind of more critical to this combination of board right here. It's going to ultimately be whatever we do or don't say is going to come out of the GBOS now. We're trying to get something more particular out of GBOS. So if you guys are comfortable with it, maybe we can put that conversation to when HHHAC makes their recommendation. But can we just circle back around to the point about, I think I would like, as a member of GBOS and as a member of the community, if we can agree in the future that if we change something that could be viewed as fundamentally different from what comes out of LUC, that we circle back to what's in our rules and procedures about this, and go back to, writing something official, or, depending on what our understanding of time restriction is, that we can just include that as part of our discussion.
Where's the decision about what's fundamental and what's not coming? Because that's really what this is about. Is that one sentence fundamental and critical or not?
I think that that discussion needs to happen, and we accidentally didn't have it. So I'm not saying, oh yeah, this is clearly fundamental or not fundamental. I'm saying that as a board, we didn't have that discussion. It was just, whoops, we're all caught up in this. This is a train that's moving very fast. I just think, particularly with this issue, let's try to do it a little differently next time. If there's and I think it pretty clearly just clerical, especially because for whatever reason, we didn't spend much time discussing the biggest difference between our resolution and theirs. And so we didn't give it a chance to be fundamental or not, is what I would say.
Thank you. I think that the word fundamental we could bring into land use, whereas it's in ours too, with the petitioner.
Yeah.
Always,
I'm sorry.
with the petitioner always.
Yes.
And then for housekeeping, well, maybe we could still go into new business, but it's,
Said about 15 minutes.
we have a motion to
Actually,
extend.
we're okay doing it until.
We're okay.
We're okay doing it until 10, I think, if it's under GBS rule.
If it's under GWS rules, yes, we are. It's just published from 7 to 9. Okay, great. Any other comments from the board about agenda item number 2? Okay, thank you all for your discussions and all your time. Number 3 now for new business was the garage library manager position being removed, and this item was brought to our attention by the thank you. It starts with B, like books, boosters, library boosters, and Brooks Chandler. So anyone who'd like to speak with us to this item can, and I see that Brooks is online too, but it's really important to our community, and we were sent the email that they sent to Judy, so to support them would be right, probably the right thing to do.
I think it's, oh,
Go ahead, Mike.
I think it's a huge concern that they're downgrading what is a branch to, I don't know what they call it, but something less than a branch. And it's, you know, it's a big concern for the future if it's being managed somewhere else and it's not considered a full branch, unlike Eagle River and the other one too. I did briefly mention that we would be talking about it tonight to Brooks, and Brooks said there was some, they did get some response to their letter. But I haven't seen that yet, so we can track that down. Oh, sorry, Brooks. Could you speak to that? Did you get or anyone else from the library booster? Did you get a response to your letter to
Yeah, Mike, thanks. Yes, we did. The boosters are going to be discussing it. I forwarded it to the Board of Supervisors earlier this evening. I think it'd be premature to get into the details of that until the boosters has actually discussed it amongst ourselves, which I think we'll do later this week. So that's kind of the status right now. The board will be able to see the response from the deputy director. You know, I'm sure Margaret will pass that around to you in the next day or two. So that's kind of where this particular issue is at. Is it on the agenda just to get on the agenda again later? Is that what you're doing tonight?
Yeah, it's on new business, so we can discuss it in September and act on it without going through extra.
Yeah. Well, that's great because, you know, one of the things about the process, of course, is that it takes a while. So doing this advances it to your September agenda. I think that'll work out pretty well with what the boosters are working on right now. And, thanks for doing that.
Thank you. Although you said you weren't going to go into any details, did it look like the problem has been resolved and they're making it a branch again?
Oh, no.
Right. I didn't think that would be the case. Thank you.
Yeah.
So it hasn't gone away.
No, it has not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooks, for being online to answer the questions and all of your support with the boosters. And we'll be eager to hear what your board decides later this week.
You're welcome.
Can I also say thank you for the letter to the ADN as well, to the boosting club. I thought that was very, very effective.
Welcome again.
Okay, any other comments from the board? Item 3? Okay, move to the next item is actually a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Mike motion, do we have a second? Second. Second by Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for all of your time. Thanks.
It sounds more corrupt than it is, but I couldn't find my checkbook. I don't know.